Hi, I'm Ibi, and welcome to this episode of Kill the Cat, where we're discussing the 2019 Netflix film El Hoyo, aka The Platform. In this episode, we'll be looking at how to use dread in your screenplays and films to create not only a compelling story, but a potent social message. This episode comes with a few warnings. The Platform contains graphic depictions of violence, including cannibalism and off-screen sexual assault. We will be discussing these in the episode, and we'll also be discussing all the major plot points, including the ending. The feeling of dread that we're going to investigate throughout really can't be experienced unless you watch this film spoiler-free. So if you haven't seen it, we really recommend that you save this episode until a later time where you have. Otherwise, enjoy the episode. Welcome to Kill the Cat. Today we are talking about The Platform.
Yeah, so this is our first horror movie, although we were discussing before, we're not actually quite sure what genre this falls in.
Yeah.
If you had to categorize it, it would probably be a horror.
I think so. I mean, Netflix categorizes it as horror thriller.
Yeah.
I've decided this genre is just called lock people in a room and see what they do.
There's a few. We looked at them before. There's Saw.
Yeah.
The Cube.
Circle.
Not the Emma Watson film.
No.
My first feature script, When the Rains Came. Also borrows a little bit from the genre.
Yeah, I think we're familiar with the genre.
Snowpiercer, I put into this category. That's a train.
Yeah.
Actually, I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard The Platform referred to as vertical Snowpiercer.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Snowpiercer is one of my all-time favourite movies, so that is a high compliment.
So, I guess talking about where this came from and what we're wanting to talk about, we kind of wanted to look at dread and how to evoke a feeling of dread in a film. So, when I first watched this, it was like 1 a.m. or something.
You watched this at 1 a.m.?
I think I finished it at 1 a.m.
That's brave.
Yeah, well, it was late at night. I couldn't sleep, and I was like, I'll watch a movie. And Netflix was like...
Okay. That's an interesting choice.
Yeah, look, at this point, Netflix was really pushing it, and I was like, okay, I'll watch it. Look, no regrets, but some regrets.
It's a hard watch.
It is a hard watch, and hopefully everyone who's listening now has heeded our warning, because if you haven't watched this film, listening to this episode will ruin it for you. At least ruin the aspects we're talking about in the feeling of dread.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all the plot points, and once you know what happens and where the film is going, you don't get that dread. We'll come back to... Yeah, Netflix is pushing this really hard just as we went into lockdown for COVID. And I think because it is and everyone was like, panic buying and stockpiling toilet paper, and this whole film was about trying to share resources, pretty much.
So why don't we define, to start off with, what dread is? What are we talking about when we talk about dread?
Yeah, so in my notes I had dread is different to anxiety or fear. So if you are anxious about something or fear something, you're worried that a bad thing might happen. And dread is more anticipating something awful you know is going to happen.
Yeah.
That's the key difference there.
The anticipation of fears coming true. Or fears about to come true is kind of what I've got.
So that's very common in horror movies. Just because of the genre, we know bad things are going to happen. And we dread them happening. Yeah,
I think this movie, though, does a lot of things that normal horror movies don't necessarily do. It's not your slasher movie. It's not a supernatural thriller. Yeah, it's quite unique.
It's just people trying to survive. Which is probably like the scariest thing there is. And they're not evil people either. They're just people.
Trimagasi has a great line when he's got Goring tied up where he says, I'm not a murderer, I'm just someone who's scared. And the way people are reacting, and we get to see Goring kind of change through the movie, like these reactions are very genuine to a really intense situation.
For anyone who is listening to this who hasn't seen the movie, which maybe you like our podcast, but The Platform's not your cup of tea, which I would understand. This is briefly the setup of the movie. Our protagonist, Goring, is in a vertical prison known as the Hole. We are told there are 200 floors. Each have 2 people on each floor. And once a day, a platform of food moves down the prison and you get to eat what's on it. So basically, you are eating all the people above you's leftovers. We are told that there's enough food to get to everyone at the bottom, but because the people on top are greedy, the people down the bottom starve. So that's the basic setup.
And we do come to realize eventually a lot of those things are not true.
So we're going to talk a bit about just starting with, so like we said, no supernatural, no magic, no monsters, just people. And this taps into some really like visceral, like survival fears that we have as humans. So the number one thing that it revolves around is starvation. Trimagasi even says it's about eating.
Yeah.
That's the whole film. It's just about eating and whether or not you are going to survive or starve to death. Which leads us to cannibalism.
Yeah.
That's a thing in this movie.
It's a thing that happens only 30 minutes into the film, and they're like, there's still an hour to go. Cool.
I think in that situation, they kind of set up like the worst thing that could possibly happen to you is that you get eaten or you have to eat someone.
Yeah. Trimagasi sets up, so in the film there's the three roommates that fit into the three acts of the film. Trimagasi is act one, which is the first third. Imaguri is Imagiri. We're going to butcher pronunciations.
Sorry.
We don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, plus heavy New Zealand Aussie accents, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But we'll try and get
live with it.
Correct as we can.
But Imagiri is Act 2 and Baharat is Act 3. Trimagasi, he kind of gives the rundown of his experience of the prison, where he's talking about the levels he's been on, and he actually somehow got real lucky because he, in his, I think 10 months he had been there, by the time we meet him, he had only been below level 100 once. And he tells us that when he was on 132, he resorted to cannibalism. He claims he didn't murder his partner, but that actually a body fell from one of the higher floors and just happened to land on their floor, and they ate from that person. But we get set up with this, like, 132, and we know, like, cannibalism is on.
Yeah. Falling to your death, by the way, whether by accident or on purpose, also a very real thing that can happen.
There's
production
no
design
barrier.
sets it up. We're going to talk about like the production design later.
There's a lot to talk about.
I don't want to say it's a pretty film. That's a weird way to describe it, but
it's a well-designed film.
There we go. Yeah, I was going for like beautifully designed, but I'm like, there's nothing beautiful in this film, except the food on the platform.
Yeah.
Before 70 people or however many eat from it, and it arrives in Goring's level. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, even when you do get food, it's the people above you've leftovers, and they're not considerate, and we get like montages of people like shoving it in their face and spitting on it, dancing on the table, putting their feet in it.
Yeah.
We see Trimagasi like piss on the food at some point.
And spit on it in the very first experience. And like Goring's like, why would you do that? You know, what if the people above did that to us? And Trimagasi's like, they probably have.
So that's scene one of the movie.
Yeah.
All that happens.
Yeah. One of the keys for this film of building its setup and kind of introducing us to the world is they do the ignorant protagonist to kind of bring us up to speed with where we are, what we're seeing. Even though Goring has come here voluntarily, a lot of information has been left out, and it becomes very quickly clear to us he is someone who is ignorant and woefully underprepared.
Yeah, I think the fact he came here voluntarily is really important. So he doesn't wake up panicked, like he hasn't been kidnapped or anything. There's not the whole thing, which I think would be the tempting route to go down, which is like, where am I? What's happening? I think it's set up in the movie as a psychological experiment you can apply to.
It's the vertical
self-management center.
Self-management center.
Yeah.
So it's set up as far as I can understand, I don't think we're ever given a clear answer. It is set up for some people as a prison, but then for others as a place they can come to kind of work on themselves. At least that's what Goring comes for.
Yeah,
he wants to quit smoking and read
Don Quixote and get a diploma.
Yeah.
Metaphor for capitalism. We'll get into that later. So he's very unprepared, and we learn this very quickly. So we said he's here to read Don Quixote. Don Quixote is a huge inspiration for this. Goring basically is Don Quixote. He looks like Don Quixote is meant to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this idea of the last knight in a world that is now beyond knights. Goring tries to be a good person. Throughout, I think.
I think he has a little dip as you should for a character arc, in the second act.
Yeah.
He kind of becomes corrupted by Tremagasi and his experience on 171. And then when he's with Imagiri, she has to try and kind of convince him and coax it back out of him. And Act 3 is him committing to that.
And he's eaten both of them. So they play into the idea of like, once you've eaten someone, they're like inside you and part of you. And he's having the hallucinations of both of them. And he meets up with Tremagasi at the end as a friend.
Yeah.
If you're confused because you haven't seen the movie, yes, they are dead, we think.
Pretty sure.
We'll discuss the ending as well. It's an interesting one.
The message requires no bearer.
Yes. So, ignorant protagonist. We've brought this up a couple of times in our Harry Potter and John Wick episodes. Great way to deliver exposition.
Here's the catch, though. When you use an ignorant protagonist, the expectation is typically that you give true information to the protagonist. So when you as an audience are watching an ignorant protagonist, if you're watching Harry Potter, you expect that people tell him the truth about Hogwarts. It's kind of something that we've just taken as a given as part of sort of the overall film language. What this movie kind of cleverly does is actually switch that up, in that Goring is basically never really given true information. He's constantly given misinformation, and that kind of leads into some of these really intense moments. That's
what we call the oh fuck moments.
Yeah, it kind of gives us this unexpected sense of dread. Not only do we get the anticipation of like, we're expecting something bad to happen, but now all of a sudden we get surprised by that bad thing that happens because we didn't think that was possible. So a couple of the ones that really stood out to me in the first watch. The very first one is when they wake up on level 171. It's match shot of the eyes opening to the first scene, and then we see that Goring is tied up, and then we just see 171. And suddenly your heart just drops because we've been told up until that point that Tremagasi has never gone below 132, and he's been there for 10 months at this point. But when he went to 132, he had to resort to cannibalism. And so all of a sudden, all that information just kind of hits us and we're like, oh no. And we know that he's tied up and we're just going to have to watch this play out. Like, there is nothing that our protagonist can do in this situation.
I remember I remember that moment, and my brain also going, already? Because we talked a little bit earlier about like, being eaten is the worst thing that can happen to you, and they just go for that reasonably fast into the movie.
About the 22-minute mark, I think that happens.
Yeah, and he doesn't eat him straight away. He makes a point of he has to purge the body for 7 days. This is when he starts calling him his little snail.
Yeah.
In a wonderfully creepy way. And we have a whole montage of just waiting for him to get eaten. And then we see the first... Oh, it's making me like cringy when I say this. And then we see like the first cut, shall we say, in vivid detail. Then he gets rescued. But...
Go Miharu.
The best character. Maybe Baharat. I did like Baharat quite a lot.
He was fun.
Yeah.
They were both quite good.
Yeah.
We saw more of Miharu.
Yeah, that's true.
The other sort of oh fuck moment, at least for me, was the second act. We get told by Imagiri, who's part of the administration, right? So we've been told from some crazy old guy who has been in here for a while, some information. We found out that wasn't necessarily good information. So we're like, okay, Imagiri's going to have the right information. And she says there are 200 levels. That's it. Everyone can eat if they take only what they need to take. And then they wake up on 202. What I love about that is that it's like, it's only 2 levels past, but it shatters everything we would have just believed. Because all of a sudden the whole system... Even the person who represents the system was told a lie.
And then he goes and looks over the edge down the hole and he can't see the bottom because there's so many more levels below level 202.
Yeah.
We do learn finally that there are 333 levels, which makes it 666 prisoners.
Yeah.
Symbolism.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, and then the third one is when they're going down. They decide to go all the way to the bottom, and the levels just keep going and going and going until they hit 333.
Yeah.
And then the last bit of like information we were told, also from Imagiri, is that under 16s are not allowed in the hole. 16-year-olds shouldn't be allowed in the hall.
Yeah, no, look, that's messed up.
I don't think we see any.
No, we do see, and this stood out to me more on my second watch, but there is a pretty young-looking man who has Down syndrome, who we see, like, they give him some food, and he has a very old roommate. They're in, like, 200 and something, I think. But he says, like, I'll just rip open the old guy's stomach and eat the food you give him from his belly. And it's this really intense, creepy...
Just no emotion behind it either.
Yeah. So the movie's constantly kind of dealing in those heart-dropping moments.
And then there's a little girl at the very end.
Yes.
Maybe. I mean, there's an actress there. Whether or not that we're in Goring's imagination at that point, I'm not sure.
Yeah. In my watchings, I always kind of conceive that as real until the following day where he gets off the platform. But there are arguments to be made in all ways because, you know, where'd that child come from? She looks to be 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And if it was Mahari's child, well, she was only there for supposedly 10 months, but then that could have been a lie as well. So
I have no idea.
Yeah, you just don't know if...
And we're told it's a boy the whole time. Mahari's looking for her little boy, and it's a girl.
Yeah.
They did shoot the original ending they shot that she got to level 0.
Yes.
So it was a more definitive ending. But in the end, they took that out and made it more ambiguous. And you just see her growing up.
Which I think it was the right choice for this movie.
Same.
I'm not generally huge on ambiguous endings and things like that.
And I think like this movie kind of criticizes, we start with capitalism and then we go to communism and then we go to socialism, and it basically says none of these work and we don't have the answer. Hence the ambiguous ending. So he called it a social self-criticism, not a social critique. And his whole thing, like the only thing he had at the end was, all we can really do is protect the younger generations from our corruption and hope that they come up with something better. Because we haven't found the solution. And this movie doesn't have one.
Yeah.
There's no way out of the hole.
Out of the hole. How hopeful.
Yeah, the director himself said, to me that lowest level doesn't exist. Goring is dead before he arrives, and that's just his interpretation of what he felt he had to do.
Carrying on for the talking about hope and how it plays into this movie, I do think one of the ways that this film really feeds into dread is it's this kind of interplay of hope and fear. If you follow the thread of the plot of the story, even though Goring is meant to be there and knows he's going there, the opening scene is unsettling. The way it's shot, the space itself, we just feel unsettled. And then we get introduced to Tremagasi, who he's a criminal or at least has killed someone. He's clearly much more hardened and is a bit more hostile. We see the platform come down and we realize the sort of mechanic of this place. And so we're kind of like, oh, okay, it reduces our hope. And then it builds it up with the montage of Tremagasi and Goring actually becoming friends and getting to know each other. And then it drops us again when they wake up on 171. And then we get to like level 8 and we meet someone from the administration who wants to put an end to this. And it's like, oh, if people work together, we can, stop this. And then they wake up on 202 and it turns out all the information we had was a lie. And then it's, level 6 and they're so close to an escape, but then they need to go back down the levels to do the right thing. And so we're like, oh no. And then it's just constantly bringing us up and then dropping us down. If it wasn't giving us those moments of hope and levity where we saw maybe there's a way out of this, maybe there's a way to fix this, maybe there's a way to beat the system in this, I don't think it would be as effective as a film. It would just be a massive downer and we'd get kind of sick of it.
Yeah, if things just got steadily worse and it was just one horrible thing after the other, it wouldn't work because you get exhausted. And I actually felt more on edge sometimes in the breaks. Like when he gets to level 33 and he's with an okay roommate. So that's another thing, you never know who your roommate's going to be. They do a fake out where he wakes up and he thinks he's with Maharu, who is famous for killing her roommate, so she might be put with her son next time. And she comes at him with the samurai plus. And then that's a dream. And we wake up and it's a roommate. But yeah, that whole time you're just kind of waiting for the next thing to happen. And like we said, the worst thing has happened. Like someone tried to eat him and then he had to eat that person.
Yeah.
So what's left? I remember watching it and being like, where is this going? Because it kind of has to end with them finding a way out, right? Or finding a solution. And they start going there with Goring and Baharat. Yeah, I remember them waking up on level 6 and that should be a relief, but it's not. at all. They do set that up, like Trimagasi says, like the people who end up top often commit suicide because you're just waiting for the next month.
You have nothing to look forward to,
yeah,
and a lot to think about.
Yeah, that's how he phrased it. So a lot of them just jump. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, even when he's level 6 and he knows he's going to get food for the month, it's not enough.
It's an interesting thing because his hallucination of Trimagasi actually says to him, he's like, it's okay, you're on level 6. Eat well this month. You can live one more month even if you're on a lower level because, you know, you can survive that long and then you're out. And so actually Goring is given the chance to escape. Like he can finish his sentence and just get out, but he doesn't. Yeah,
because he wants to do the right thing. Actually, just so someone on YouTube, the channel is called Nerd Explains, and the video is called How to Beat the Hunger and Death in the Platform. So he ran down the calculations for how likely it would be for you to survive the hole for 6 months. So you have a 30% chance of getting on a level that will give you enough food to survive. So if you're on level 111 or lower, you're definitely going to starve. An average person can survive about 45 days without food. So if you're there for 6 months, you can survive 1 month below level 111, but not 2. So imagine this as tossing a coin 6 times. You need 5 of those tosses to land on 111 or above. If you get 2 below, you starve, which means the chances of surviving the hole is 1.09%.
Unless you resort to cannibalism.
Yeah.
So
those are the stats.
Become cannibals, everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the message of this movie.
I think so.
We should all just become cannibals.
Yeah.
Just make sure that your victims have not experienced any cold or flu symptoms in the past 14 days.
And haven't been to any COVID hotspots.
Yes. Make sure you interview them first before you eat them. Very important.
Cool.
Where were we? So they start off with the idea of if they can go like down on the platform, they can hand out food to those people who are starving. This is the Socialism Act. And they start that, and immediately it becomes very apparent that that is hopeless. People attack them for food. They end up killing a lot of the people they set out to help and feed.
It's pretty brutal.
It's
Bahara
very brutal.
Is a bit of a beast.
Yeah.
It's great. He's great to watch.
Though.
Like, you know, again, it's a bit violent, but it's a great watch.
Yeah, he's just so optimistic for his situation. Also, he tries to climb out of the hole, which is probably the last solution the audience is thinking of.
Yeah.
He has a rope. Everyone's allowed to bring 1 item into the hole. So a lot of people bring like weapons. Goring brought a book. Someone brought a surfboard, and someone brought money. Which is probably the most on-the-nose piece of symbolism there is, but it works.
Especially when it's like raining down on them as
like,
they...
it's hopeless.
Like, guys.
Yeah, odd moments of comedy throughout this. Even like Trimagasi's... Like,
he's quite funny.
He is quite funny, and the main actor usually he comes from a comedy background. Yeah, and like we're saying, like Trimagasi is creepy, but he's fun to watch.
Yeah,
obviously. It's his word. Don't steal it. So and then they get to a level which there's a convenient wise old man who tells them. It's one of those things where like, I'll forgive you for that. There's a very convenient wise old man who's like, you can't just do this. You need to send a message to the kitchen.
Yes. What I liked about that, and I only picked up on, I think in my second watch, I enjoyed it more for the sort of political side of the commentary and the sort of metaphors and stuff. I think you miss a bit of that because of how intense the movie is the first time around. But the old wise man, he basically says, like, the administration have no conscience. The best you can hope for is that someone on level 0 has a conscience.
Yeah, so that's the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I think because we've learned, like Imaguri said 200 and we've seen 202, part of that is maybe they just don't know what goes on in here.
Yeah.
Like it's referred to as a vertical self-management center. Maybe they don't know. So the idea there is pick a dish and send it back untouched. This is the platform obviously comes back wiped clean every day. And they chose a panna cotta because it's just sugar and cream and it's very simple. And the idea of that was like something pure can survive in the hole if adults work together. which stops being the panna cotta and becomes the little girl at the end.
And we do get also the scene between acts. Our intermissions are us going back to the kitchen and seeing things happen there. So we get our first scene is just a general introduction to the kitchen. I believe our second one is the panna cotta or the snails. I can't remember what order it happened.
Oh, we go back to the panna cotta. They do that interesting thing where
they set something up well before we actually
understand what it is. That's one of those things I didn't really pick up until the second viewing. Yeah, so the downer ending to this is the little girl doesn't exist. It is the panna cotta that Goring sends up. And they find a hair on it. And it's the chef going around trying to find whose hair which chef the hair belongs to, and yelling at them. And the idea that the message has completely been missed. Because they sent it back not as a revolution, but as there's like a hair on it.
Yeah,
it can't be eaten. Which plays into the idea of just totally
it needed to
different
be
priorities,
perfect, right?
Yeah, that the rich have.
Yeah.
That's only one interpretation. It's a viable one. It's the downer one.
There's a number of them.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about structure? Because this one's actually a little bit curious in its structure. So normally it is 3 acts, but typically when you get your standard 3-act structure that you'll learn from screenwriting books and that kind of thing kind of works more in quarters, where your first quarter-ish is your act 1, your second 2 quarters are your act 2, and there's a midpoint that divides them, and then your last quarter is your act 3. That's not exactly it, but that's typically how, especially if you use the circular clock model, that's kind of what you get taught. This one has 3 acts, but they are equally spaced, and it's at the 30-minute mark, the first one ends, the 54-minute mark, the second one ends, an hour 28 when the movie ends, the last one ends.
Yeah, it's almost like an anthology of 3 different episodes in the whole. And Goring's there for all 3 of them, but he gets a different roommate every time, which is really interesting. Like, you get one of the best characters, which is Bharat, at the hour mark.
Yeah.
He's so great. And then you get him for half an hour and then he dies.
But it also means you get introduced to some of the really heavy stuff very quickly. Like the cannibalism and just the absolute despair. Originally, the script came out of a stage play, which I think feeds into this a little bit. And you were saying,
Yeah, when I was watching it, I was like, this is very theatrical. It's usually there's 2 people in a room, usually talking. Yeah, I do remember watching it and being like, this feels like a play.
Yeah.
And you told me it came from one, so that makes total sense.
So it's just it's a very curious kind of way to write a script, and it worked
for me more on the second viewing.
Okay.
I think in the first viewing, you're not quite sure where you're going, ever, which is, I think, very intentional. And like we said, the first viewing is very just trying to get through the heavy stuff and where are we? What is the platform? And you're kind of there on the surface level, just really enjoying it. And when you go back and watch it the second time, it's very much, okay, I get it. It's capitalism, it's communism, it's socialism, and it's critiquing those 3.
Yeah, and you can appreciate the metaphor and sort of the subtler details of the plot and what's going on. First viewing, it's a movie that really sticks with you. What was your experience of watching it?
Yeah, so I watched it on your recommendation. It was good. I watched it with 2 others. I remember just even the trailer. I went and watched the trailer, and then we'd agreed to watch it together, and it was a good 4 days before we got to see it. And the trailer itself was just playing in my mind that whole time, because it has not the most disturbing images, but a few, it's got Goring tied up like he is, and it's playing the music. So I remember that. Basically, the trailer is just what the premise of the movie is, which is what trailers should be. Sometimes they tell you the whole plot.
You're like, why would you ruin the twist for me?
Yes.
Trailer.
I remember gasping when he woke up on level 202.
Same.
We all gasped at the same time.
I paused the movie and I was like
literally just...
Oh my God. Yeah.
There's not many movies that can do that.
No. I think this movie, for me, this movie did that on my first viewing more times than I think any other movie has shocked me.
You just can't get your feet under you at all. And neither can Goring, who's we're aligned with.
Why don't we talk, this is all great plot stuff and stuff towards building dread, but I think actually we'd be remiss to not talk about some of the technical and production decisions that were made that actually built this stuff up as well. So I've been listening to the soundtrack for the last like 2 days on repeat. The music in this film it's this somewhat eclectic mix of droning violins with what sounds like pots and pans, and the main theme that you get through the montages that actually you hear that 3 times, and it happens once in each of the acts and kind of develops through the movie. It sounds almost like a ticking clock made out of the pots and pans of the kitchen. And it's just this kind of curious rather than terrifying, like it's a curious horror theme. And yeah, I think it's really effective. There are other times where it's using things like xylophones and music box kind of sounds and these almost childish instruments to push its themes. And it just becomes very unsettling.
Yeah, it's almost like, because this whole thing is set up as a social experiment, it's almost like the whole itself is curious as to how humans are surviving in it without really caring. It's that objective gaze of the administration. The like Imiguri is kind of saying, we're trying to find what would create a spontaneous act of solidarity. And Goring, who is very jaded by this point and not the naive person he came into the whole as, comes back, so why? So the government could stop it if it happened. Yeah. We're given very little information about the administration, and it works great for this.
Yeah, and I think that's intentional, right? Like, we didn't really talk about this, but it's the idea of like the invisible enemy, the kind of monster that we don't ever see, which is a classic trait of good horror films, is when we don't know our antagonist. We just have to kind of experience the antagonist.
Yeah, so we don't see the administration outside of Imiguri during Goring's interview. We never know who Goring's going to wake up with. And then we realise we don't know how many levels there are.
Yeah.
Going back to that idea of like we don't know how many levels there are, the production design in this, we touched on this earlier, very effective considering they're basically in stone rooms.
Yeah, well, I think that... I learnt about a type of architecture recently called brutalism. It's a genre of architecture that essentially is just your really utilitarian, like, slabs of concrete. It's very square. It's very almost offensive to look at. And these kind of rooms fit that, right? Like, they are squares with a green light, a red light, a tap, and a mirror, and 2 beds. And a hole. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no railings. There's no safety nets. Yeah. We see someone fall down like really early on. I think.
And the other thing is the platform, when it comes back up, it comes shooting back up. It's this really intense, like the first time we experience it, it's kind of shocking. And then you get to see Goring by the end of, I think, the first month, he is just used to it and he's laying there as it shoots back up and he doesn't even react.
Yeah. I'll come back to sound design. I feel like you can't talk about something without talking about food. And just the production design of the feast on the platform sent down every day.
Beautiful.
It's so beautiful at the top and it's so disgusting by the time it reaches Goring.
Yeah.
The first thing he eats is like a tiny little green bean. And they've somehow made it look slimy and
it's browned and gone slimy and gross.
You can just imagine that someone's like spit it back out. You don't know what's on it. And he slowly eats.
Yeah. One of the things sound design wise that stuck out to me is just the sound of the chewing is amplified so much throughout the whole thing, and especially Tremagasi as he eats. It's just like...
Is there a worse sound?
I don't think so.
I cannot stand... When people eat on trains, I have to change carriages.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I can't take it.
No, but it's such effective sound design. It just kind of, again, that impressive... puts you on edge, makes you feel just off.
That noise when the platform's arriving made me jump every single time they used it. It's this horrible, loud, buzzing sound that will come out of nowhere. And when they're going down, the sounds of the buzzer gets closer and closer together as they hit more levels.
Yeah. Some of the things, even just down to like lens choices, like the way it's shot, the way it's lit, are all very reminiscent of most horrors. Like we get a lot of sort of shallow depth of field, a lot of close-ups during montages to just kind of isolate certain things and give us a feeling of a bit of isolation. But even the lenses that we used are quite imperfect. There's a few shots like where you're getting this wide angle shot and you just see like the distortion in the lens of lines that should be straight and they're just completely bowed, and that just kind of adds to this effect of how off-putting it is and how, what's the word, oppressive.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Yeah, the environment they're in is.
Yeah, to signal night, there's no windows down there. They have the red lights.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's night, the red lights flash on, which makes everything look nice and creepy. And then they combine that with the editing. So basically every month gets a montage with the musical refrain. The montages are dread in themselves because you know they're speeding towards something and you never know what that something's going to be. And there's also a lot of montage cutting around the food.
Yeah.
There's that montage of like the food being snatched and like ripped open. And
yeah,
like,
it's a really
one of the cakes.
It's a fascinating montage where they start on level 0 and you see it progressively go from pristine and people taking bits more calmly to just like people are stepping on it and the food looks disgusting and it's kind of all the dishes have mushed together into just this sludge, and it's I actually
had to pick a very specific time to watch this film because you can't watch it too soon after a meal or too soon before one.
Yeah,
you have to be careful.
There has to be a buffer zone.
Yes. And then a lot of jump cuts throughout, which further disorientates you.
Yeah.
Especially, and then the montages as well. So
the platform. Worth seeing. If you haven't seen it twice, go watch it again. It's worth seeing the second time. Why don't we do some quick takeaways and then we'll wrap up there.
All right. How to build dread. I think my biggest takeaways of this, definitely the misinformation. Without cheating your audience. This isn't quite the same as lying to your audience so you can have a twist later. This is cleverly done in that the people talking to Goring are telling him what they think is the truth.
Yeah. Characters need to remain honest.
The characters are honest.
Yeah.
And that builds into this world where like maybe no one knows what the truth is and they're just stuck here. Setting up the rules and stakes in the very first scene. Yeah. Including the worst thing that can happen and then doing the worst thing, well, what we think is going to be the worst thing 30 minutes in.
Yep.
That's definitely... I mentioned I wrote a feature, also has a bit of cannibalism in it, but that's presented as the worst thing towards the end of Act 2.
Yeah.
I never thought about putting it up front like this. Yeah, and then I think the last takeaway I would have definitely was your idea of like the interplay of hope and fear. If you're going to write a movie like this, it can't all be horror and dread. We need that bit of hope to the point where he wakes up on level 6 and the hope is almost as bad because we know to dread that the worst is to come. Yeah,
it's that constant setup, what could be the worst, and then give it to us, and then give us some hope for the next thing, and then set up the next thing that you drop us down with.
Small note, there is a dog in this film, and the moment you see the dog, it's even a sausage dog. You know that dog's getting eaten.
Oh, they say he's like, really dumb idea to bring a sausage dog into a place like this.
Yeah, it's getting eaten. There's no way that dog is not getting eaten.
Yeah.
Your takeaways.
Look, my takeaways are your takeaways, basically. I think the interplay of hope and fear, making sure that you've got the high points and low points, and jump between them. Like, they are, in this movie, they are stark, and I think for horror, they should be. Like, slowly build your hope and then drop it suddenly. And again, I love how they've done both ignorant protagonist and unreliable narrators, and how they've managed to marry that while staying honest to characters and honest to plot. I think if you can effectively do that, you will just give your audience this constant sensation of like, what can I possibly do? So I think those would be my takeaways from this movie.
It's an intense one.
Yeah.
I've already watched it again one day.
Oh, I think it's up there as like a movie I can now watch.
Yeah, once you know what's coming, which is why I suggested that you definitely watch it before listening to this, because once you know all that stuff is coming, that sense of dread isn't there.
Yeah, no, and it's when you're aware of that, it's suddenly a very different experience watching it the second time.
Still enjoyable, but not
very enjoyable.
Not the dread we were talking about.
Cool.
All right, until next time.
Until next time. That was our episode on the platform and how to use dread. If you like the episode and want to hear more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell to receive notifications when we post. You can stay tuned for future episodes on Uncut Gems, Jessica Jones, and Schitt's Creek. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been Kill the Cat.
The panna cotta is the message.
The girl is the message.
The message requires no bearer.